Well, let's get started this morning, and a few people may continue to roll in. Welcome, Grace family. Good to see you all this morning. This is, I believe, our sixth class in our ongoing series, Race, Whiteness, and the Church. Glad that you all made it out this morning for this. And just to refresh, our objectives for this course are to understand more about the history of race and the experience of being Black in America, to discuss the concept of institutional racism together, to understand more about how the sin of racism has impacted the health, unity, and witness of the church, and to explore how we at Grace Seattle can be a healing community in that context. So that's what we're up to. And this morning, we are really thrilled to have another guest speaker to share with us today. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to my wife to make introductions.
Hi, everybody. Drew and I are on Whidbey, and so to make sure we have maximum Wi-Fi effectiveness, we're in two different locations. So we're just making sure. Drew, as I talk, can you admit folks? Can I let you do that? Thanks. So everyone, we're so happy to welcome Leonetta Elaiho today. Leonetta is a colleague and friend, and you may have read a little bit more about her in the bio that we sent around a few days ago when you registered for the class. It's hard to imagine being this far into the pandemic without without her wonderful friendship. It's been a gift in many ways, and she is an amazing human. So I just feel like bursting with excitement to have her here with us in our community today. And just a little bit more about her. She's going to speak to us today about her experience being Black in dominant culture spaces. She, her husband and son are members of Rainier Avenue Church, and we were just chatting before everyone joined. I was able to listen to her give a sermon in February, which feels like a different eternity, but it was such a wonderful morning and moment to hear her speak and to be able to worship with that community. So in a post-pandemic reality, I hope everyone can visit Rainier Avenue Church. But Leonetta is a creative contemplative, a writer, a public theologian. She thrives at the intersection of culture, faith, and justice. And then the arc of her work has always bent towards the margins and her desire for racial inclusion and radical inclusion, rather, of the typically excluded. So she completed the Soul Formation Academy of Spiritual Formation in 2016. I think several Grace folks are either going through that program or have. And the School of Spiritual Direction program in June of 2019, and is a spiritual director. She started to meet with directees in 2019. So we're excited to welcome her and listen. And without further ado, Leonetta, welcome to Grace.
Thank you so much, and thank you, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. It's not every day that you are introduced by New York Times published authors, so thank you.
Thanks for that.
I'm still super excited about that. So I've loved getting this invitation. I know we're in a moment where there are a lot of conversations and statements being put out around Black Lives Matter, but I'm just really grateful to be a part of a community that's committing to the long haul of this work. And so I honor Drew for the invitation and your leadership and all of you that are making this space week after week for this really important conversation. Before I jump in though, I have to say hi to some of my friends. I haven't had a chance to actually visit Grace in person, but post-pandemic, I'm excited to do so. But I have to say hello to Edna and Matt, who I saw a second ago. Edna and I, our sons attend the same 8th grade, and Edna was probably the first person I made an authentic connection with at Lakeside. She's just quite a delight and a force, as you all know. Erin, who I don't know if she's on, I want to say hi to her. We traveled to Kenya together many moons ago. And also I know pastors Jason and Foxy Davison aren't here, but I also just want to acknowledge them and honor them because their ministry has blessed me both personally. It's blessed my church community at Rainier Avenue Church, and certainly our city at large. So what we're going to do this morning that we have together, I'm going to share some personal reflections They're about race, as you know, and so we're going to jump into it. And then after that, what I'd love to do is just create a little bit of space for a contemplative moment. If you're familiar with the prayer of examen, it'll be kind of like a prayer of examen where we'll walk through just a couple of movements to just feel out what might be stirring in you. And then we'll open it up for a time of sharing. And we're going to do all that in 50 minutes or so. So that's our roadmap together this morning. But before I jump in, maybe I would just, even as we start, I'll invite us to just take a deep breath together. Talking about race can be difficult. I'm sure you guys have been doing it for a while, so it may not be as difficult for some of you, but it's especially difficult as what my grandmother would call mixed company, right? So no matter what your racial background is, we've probably all been in conversations about race that have left us feeling either misunderstood, unheard, unseen, defensive, defeated, angry, on and on and on, right? And so I just invite us to just settle in. If not having your camera on, I'm glad to see that many of you have switched your cameras off. If that's comfortable for you, great. If you want to turn it on, great. Either way, but I invite us just to settle into whatever feels comfortable to you. And let's just take a deep breath together. So I learned early in life that Black was beautiful and it also quite complicated things. When I was in 4th or 5th grade, I remember fondly that my dad, just off of the graveyard shift at Todd Shipyard, he would drive me and my sister to school, and faithfully he would share a morning mantra with us. You have to stay 3 ahead because you're going to be put 2 back. I didn't really fully understand what this meant, other than I was supposed to work hard. And I was supposed to work hard enough to be okay despite the being put back that I was to encounter. So I did work hard, and beyond that, I didn't really give my dad's daily ritual much thought. I understand now that his fatherly advice was actually born out of his own pain of a lifetime of experience that diminished his dignity. Staying 3 ahead was, for him, an earnest prayer for me to go further and do better than he was ever able to do as a Black man born in the 50s. I've thought about this a lot more in recent years, perhaps because now I'm a parent of a son and I want to make the most of my car conversations with him. So I've thought many times about what's the advice I need to give him to navigate the world successfully and to live into the fullness of his person. And so, not unlike my dad, that's not all I have to advise him on, though. One of the unique burdens of parenting a Black child is that you have the dual responsibility, both to promote a healthy self-identity, to cultivate freedom of expression and sense of pride in his culture. And I also have the equal burden to ready him for a world that might see him as a threat, that might want to diminish his humanity, might decide where he does and does not belong, simply for his beautiful brown skin. So I have to prepare him on how to keep his body safe. A few years ago, when my son went to a well child check visit at Odessa Brown Clinic, it's just a few miles from your church, maybe some of you go there, have been there, his doctor proceeded to ask him a few questions. Have your parents had a conversation with you about the police? She proceeded. If you're stopped by the police, you make sure that you do what the policeman says, okay? The most important thing is that we get you home. It may not be right, and you might not have done anything wrong, but the most important thing is that we get you home safe. This conversation was hard, awkward in its simple yet perplexing realities. Interactions with the police and young Black men and young Black women have escalated to the point of a public health crisis that doctors are beginning to recognize. I wish that this was not the case, that we could talk about the things that I assume white parents talk with their doctors about in well child check visits. But I was also grateful because I knew she was right. The most important thing was that he gets home. As all of you know, over the past few months, the painful reality of racial injustice has come into plain view for the first time for some, and in a re-injuring way for many others. This racial awakening or reawakening has come at too high a cost. The cost of many lives, like Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and so many others. The communities and families that knew them and loved them have paid most dearly. I think about Brother Ahmaud going out for a jog and not coming home. This makes me think about my own son who started to jog in the mornings in my neighborhood. I intentionally normalized this with my son because a young man being able to jog in his own neighborhood is normal. But internally, I track the time he leaves. I think about his route. I feel a little relieved every time he emerges back in through the door, 20 minutes later, sweaty, panting. I've thought so many times about Brother Floyd, lying out on the concrete, unable to see any dignity given to him as he pleaded for his life under the weight of an officer's knee. When I see Floyd's face, which I see literally everywhere, in the community, signs in people's homes, in businesses, children's illustrations of his face, I see the men in my family. Unable to watch the video, I felt my heart sink when I heard and learned that some of his final words included calling out for his mother, who had passed away years prior. I trust and believe that we can use holy imagination that perhaps she was there. A friend of mine reflected on this on Instagram, and I just loved entering into the beauty of that idea. That perhaps because Brother Floyd wouldn't make it home that day, that as some grace to the dying, she appeared a familiar face, someone to be with him as he transitioned to another home. I think about my sister Brianna, even resting peacefully in her home, she was not safe. I think of her mother though. So she was called to the scene shortly after the shooting happened, trying desperately to get answers in the parking lot of her daughter's apartment where none were given. Then she was sent to the hospital, told there that your daughter was never admitted. So then she sent back to the apartment. Now the sun is coming up. And finally, callously, she was told by an officer, her body is still inside, confirming the worst of her fears. 2 years ago, I was in a cafe in Leschi called Meet the Moon. Maybe some of you have been there. They have really good coffee cake. And I was with a friend and I was sitting on the patio and I was racially targeted and physically and verbally abused while I ate brunch. My chair was rammed into multiple times. I was called the N-word, a black bee. I was mocked and I was called Shaniqua. And I love that when I recounted this story to my son, he was like, Mom, what's wrong with the name Shaniqua? And I was like, absolutely nothing, son. And so this incident happened. It would take a long time to unpack it all, but for days after it, I could not stop thinking about the incident. I was the only Black person in the restaurant when this happened, but it all happened in very close proximity to others. If you've been there, you know it's not a small place. And despite all of what happened in the exchange between the man, the thing that I thought about most is that not one person said anything. Not one person intervened. Not one person said, hey, wait, man, that shouldn't happen. Stop. And that was the most painful part of the experience. No one had my back. Just this week, I was in a conversation with a group of high school students. I had a wonderful opportunity to speak to my alma mater, high school alma mater. I attended an all-girls school in Seattle called Holy Names, also Capitol Hill, not too far from you all as well, from your church building. And it definitely was a mostly white space when I attended back in the late 90s. And it's even whiter now. My best friend and I in high school, we started the first Black Student Union. And so we were invited back to speak over Zoom to the current Black Student Union and check in about how it was going. And so as they started sharing different stories, it was almost like you could feel through Zoom the exhaustion in their faces as they were telling us things like, one young woman shared that, we started BSU as a safe space for us to gather together as Black people. But we realized that, there were a lot of white people who wanted to be allies and wanted to join. And so we invited them in and we let them come. And then she said, and it just changed things. And now we have to be a lot more careful in how we share. We don't want to make them uncomfortable. There it was, without a second thought, they had picked up that white comfort should be prioritized over living in their own truth. So when you take all of this experience, macro narrative of generational impact of oppression, the anti-Black racism and dehumanization of Black lives, the micro reality of parenting through a racial reckoning, daily traumas of new hashtags, and disproportionality in everything, income, education, health, housing, the inconsistent allyship of white people, and the consistent messaging to keep them comfortable. All of this I carry with me when I enter into rooms made for whiteness. In dominant culture spaces, the clear but often unspoken desire is that I would pack all those things away, almost like in a backpack of sorts, and only pull them out for show and tell and to astonish and educate white people on their terms. Mostly show up and get with the unnamed program to be together in unity. That's the messaging. Back in June, I noted that my chest was feeling unusual. I went to the doctor and I told her, tried to explain these feelings that were hard to describe. They were kind of like anxiousness and breathiness. And so you can imagine what trying to explain that to a doctor is like. And she told me that day that I was the third African-American that she had seen that day with the same symptoms. It wasn't yet noon. We talked, I cried, which she created space for. And she did check my heart and to make sure that it was all okay and it passed all the tests, but we both acknowledged it was likely a little broken. I was reminded of this beautiful truth though, that God has a rich history of dealing with and working through broken things, whether hearts or whole systems. I started to experience God more richly through surrendering to grief and focusing on lament. I try to weep when I feel the urge, in the car, in the bathroom, with people. Lament allows us to recognize the present circumstances with the truth of who we are. It unpacks the backpack. It acknowledges the present pain, but also says without question, this isn't right. Lament tells me that the experiences of my people, people of color, are not a reflection of a marred identity, but an injustice to be grieved. Many efforts towards racial justice aim to change the really important things like reimagining the criminal justice system, changing policing strategies in communities of color, better integration of our educational systems, blocking voter suppression tactics, which we're seeing and have seen and are seeing a lot of that in this moment, implementing fair housing and economic practices. Racial justice is about Black Lives Matter and those lives receiving the same dignity and value as others. It's about Indigenous people being honored in the land they generously cultivated. It is about relieving the weight of burden for those who carry weight in a backpack or not in a white male patriarchal system. It is about all of those things, but they aren't its ultimate goal. The vision for racial justice is actually much more bigger, more broad, more deep, and more beautiful than that. Decolonizing, which I'm very much in the throes of, and deconstructing whiteness are just the warm-up lap. Racial justice is about a notion and vision best described and popularized by Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., the beloved community. In the beloved community, racial justice is the incarnated vision of the kingdom of God on earth that reflects the humanity, beauty, and immeasurable worth of all created beings, each formed in the imago Dei, or God's image. The notion of dominant culture, insiders and outsiders, backpacks that distort the fullness of our person are obliterated. In this community, the vision of racial justice looks like shalom. It is the fullness of well-being, a holistic prosperity, a security of peace and wholeness for everyone. It's inclusive, it's open. It's a place for radical hospitality, where agape love, whole love that is an unconquerable benevolence and an undefeatable goodwill are lavishly present. But do not mistake the beloved community as absent of conflict. It's not a place where hard conversations are avoided and everyone plays nice. Rather, it's a place where the diversity of all humanity can exist together with honesty and authenticity. It's where the Ignatian vision of cura personalis, or the care of the whole person, is thriving, and God is indeed recognized in all things. The Message version of 2 Corinthians 5:17-18 reads, "The old life is gone, a new life burgeons. Look at it. All this comes from the God who settled the relationship between us and God, and then called us to settle our relationships with each other." Racial justice in the beloved community is about settled and restored relationships. In this vision of community, the work of reconciliation is always happening. There, we agree, we disagree, but never about the humanity of each other. We love lavishly because, as Thomas Merton says, love cannot come of emptiness. It is full of reality. So we look each other in the eye and we see one another. And we also see ourselves. can we also see God? This is what racial justice looks like. May new life spring forth in our churches, in all of our hard and broken places. So I'm going to invite us just to take a deep breath together. Maybe a few. And I'm going to transition us just to a time, a couple of minutes, just to be present. And so if you, I know that might not be accessible to everyone. Maybe some of you are still doing things in your house or being present to kids, getting them breakfast. But if possible, I invite you to close your eyes if you like. You can switch off your camera again if that feels more comfortable. And as we enter into this prayer, it's called the examen, an opportunity to kind of give some spaciousness to examine what's there. I want to first invite us to check in on your body. Do you feel any sensations or physical responses present? Maybe sadness, anger, confusion, peace. Whatever feeling is there, welcome it as your teacher in this moment. What might it tell you about yourself? Hold it without judgment. So let's take just a few breaths together to notice what's there. Now let's move into looking for grief. Hear these words from theologian and freedom fighter Ruby Sales. She says, "Everywhere I go around the nation, I see and hear hurt. And I ask people everywhere, tell me, where does it hurt? Do you see and feel the hurt that I see and feel? I feel and see the hurt in Black and brown people who every day feel the vicious volley of racism and every day have their civil and human rights stripped away. And the people who do this use stereotypes and myths to justify doing it." So this question, where does it hurt, is one I want to pose to you. Where do you feel the hurt when you think about what you've heard, seen, or experienced as it relates to racism in this season? Maybe something has personally impacted you and caused you pain. Maybe you read about something or saw a video or news story, had an unsettling conversation. Maybe you're grieved by your own lack of understanding or blind spots in this area. Maybe there's grief that you feel into in your community that you all share together at Grace. So take just another minute to let any sadness or grief come to the surface for you. For some of you, feelings are going to come flooding in, and for others of you may feel a little numb, and that's all okay. Now you can take that grief that you've identified that's maybe bubbled up for you, and you can just set it aside in front of you, or just imagine it sitting, or you can gently put it down. You don't have to move it away, it can still be in your line of sight. And next, I want to invite you to now consider what you're grateful for in this season. What are you grateful for in your own life that's aided you in your journey of racial awareness or wrestling? Has there been an experience or conversation that you can point to gratitude? With gratitude, is it a person or exchange that maybe you feel thankful for? Or gifts that you can recognize in this season despite all of its pain? Could be safety or protection for you or your loved ones. Or maybe this season has opened up new ways of understanding racial pain that you didn't understand before. Maybe something in the grace community has been life-giving. Let's just take a few minutes to think about gratitude and what gifts you can recognize of this season. And as you feel into all of those pieces of gratitude, the depth of them, the shape of them, I invite you to just imagine gathering them all up, pulling them close to you, almost to sit in your lap or just to be closer to you than the pain and the grief. You just pull them close to you. And now that you've done that, let's consider where the Spirit might be inviting you forward. Where do you sense an opening or an invitation through all of this? When you think about the realities of racial injustice, where are you being invited to go deeper? Maybe going back to where we started and what you felt in your body. Where are the tender places that you are being invited to lean more into to help imagine and work towards a reality where the beloved community exists? At Grace Church, in your neighborhood, your place of work. Just take a minute to feel into that. As we take just the final minute, pause and ask God, what reality are you being invited to see or hold through this invitation? Being reminded that love doesn't come of emptiness, it's full of reality. Just take a final minute to feel into that. And so whatever came up for you in this space, maybe you have a very clear sense of conviction or a thought area to explore, go deeper in, or maybe your wheels are spinning for a number of reasons and you didn't, and that's all okay, whatever is present. And so I invite you, whatever is present for you, just to imagine gathering it up, maybe in your hands, and just pulling it into your heart space. Just imagining that intention, if you see it clearly, or that opportunity or lack of clarity, if maybe that exists, that you can just imagine that all of that can be incorporated. So just pull that close. And take a deep breath and come back to the space that we share together. You can continue to breathe deeply for as long as that feels good to you. And I'm going to invite us to take a transition breath, which is what I do a lot, which is you take a deep breath in and then it comes in the nose, out through the mouth, almost like you're blowing out a candle. And so I invite us to do that if you're comfortable. So a deep breath in. So we have about a little less than 20 minutes together. And so I'd love to open us up for a time of conversation. Some of you might be eager to chat. Other of you may be either eager to sit in silence. I should say I'm very okay with silence, so no one should feel they need to make me comfortable in silence if that's what's present, but also excited to have a conversation. And so in terms of framing, I would just say, if there's something that came up for you, either in my sharing, in the examen that we just walked through together, or questions about something that you're bringing into this conversation, anything being appropriate, feel free to share that. And then if there's things about the Grace Church community, ways that you all are thinking about decentering whiteness and dominant culture in order to kind of live more into beloved community, if there's things that you want to share, reflect on about that, also all things appropriate. So I'll open it up for whoever wants to jump in. And also if chat is more comfortable, drop thoughts or comments or things in the chat as well.
I just wanted to say thank you. Even just beyond, like, I know we have a much bigger topic, but just personally, like, going through some of that, there have been some really challenging things going on in the Grace community in the last week. And sometimes it just takes the time to really go back and let that come up. I feel like that was a really amazing ministry you've had, even just in that little context. But thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. I'm so glad. It's hard to take time in this context, right? Everything about our culture and everything about many of our realities, right? It's go, 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 go. One of the things that's been really hard for me to make space for, but really life-giving, is trying to slow down and just be. There's a lot that we're all moving through collectively right now.
I have a quick question. Could you repeat again? I wanted to remember the name of it and I couldn't. You said care for the whole person. Cura something?
Cura personalis. Yeah. One of the things, Saint Ignatius is the founder of the Jesuit order, so I'm sure many of you know, was one of the tenets that he talked a lot about. So cura person. Yeah.
Thank you. I was gonna say that kind of stuck out to me because I've been really praying and thinking about how to love on my Black and brown friends specifically right now. So I just think, just trying to think about that concept, and I'll probably go try to read up some more about that. It just, something about it just kind of felt like it rang in my spirit.
Yeah. Thanks. Adrian, I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name right. Thanks, Adrian. One of the things I have certainly in this season had lots of, I have a lot of white friends. Some of my closest friends are white. And I was overwhelmed this summer with both love and support from white people in my life that were wanting to reach out in a beautiful way. And then what I found too is that even white people that I wasn't really close with, and maybe I had met one time, I started getting emails and calls of concern. And so that was when it was a little bit overwhelming, but I do think it was I know sometimes being an ally, it's hard to figure out what's the right level of showing up. Do you show up? Do you normalize it by not making it the center of the conversation? Do you, lean in and talk about it all the time? And so I think part of what has been really life-giving is when friends are checking in of what is helpful and what do you really, how can I be helpful in this moment? But also just going, hey, I see you, I'm in it, I'm with it. So I think that's beautiful that you're even wrestling with what's the right way to support or how you can support those friends.
Hi, thank you for all that you've shared. Just on what you just said there, I was thinking about the backpack that you wear and that I know others wear. Is how, I guess I just wanted to hear a little bit more. Is it something as I enter into spaces that feel unsafe, I know that feeling of okay, I'm guarded, right? So I guess I was just curious about maybe places where you can put down the backpack, or are you always wearing it? I guess I'm just wanting to hear a little bit more about that. I feel like I'm saddened that you have to pack things away, and that makes me mad and sad, but I just wanted to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah. I'm so glad you brought up the backpack, because thank you, Lisa. I appreciate that. It is very complicated. The backpack is I'm still learning and leading into the complication of it. But one of the things that I think that is a part of the work that I'm doing in my own work of decolonizing and trying to identify how this backpack got formed, how it exists, what sustains the need for the backpack. And to your point, when can the backpack be put down? And so in my work, I think even in some of the stories that I shared, there's the forming of the backpack is as early as stay 3 ahead, you're going to be put 2 back, right? That pushes this notion of somehow you've got to work a little bit harder than everyone else. You don't really know why, but you know that that's the case. the reality of, everything that's happening to Black and brown bodies, not just in this moment, but historically, right? Like there's just so much that creates the dynamic of the backpack. And what I have realized is what sustains the need for it is white male patriarchal culture, right? It is the culture of whiteness. And when I say that, I'm not saying white people, I'm saying the culture of whiteness that white people are a victim of in as much as I am. It's more comfortable. It's a little bit easier to live into the realities of it than it is for me, versus mine feels like a heavy backpack. And for many white people, it feels like privilege and access and ease. And so it's a little harder to recognize. But I think what I've realized is that the challenge and the invitation is, how do you take off the backpack and live into a new notion, a new program of being, while you exist in the context that is very broken and that still wants to, at every corner, at every moment, tell you to strap on your backpack, put on respectability politics, show up in a way that makes white people comfortable, because if you don't, it might be bad for you, right? That is a truth. That is a reality. So when the doctor tells my son, or when I talk to my son about the reality of how to engage with the police, that is actually a fact. But the burden that I also have to explain is that that's not the reality of the kingdom. The kingdom is suffering violence, but this is what needs to break forth. This is the beloved kingdom. This is how I have to exist in this world, but not of it. And that reality is difficult. It's a balance between both asserting the truth and the freedom of who I am, wanting to believe that I can show up at work, at any place that I exist, and be respected and claim and walk in the dignity of who I am. And that actually is my burden to do. That actually is my challenge to do, irrespective of what the messaging might be. And yet also be aware of the reality that that is not yet where we exist. I may have to suffer some consequences for that. I may have to, have some, I may miss out on some opportunities for that, right? And so this isn't probably a clean, tidy answer, but the backpack is complicated. And so I think it's both understanding how it's formed, understanding the weight of it, and it's a willful intention for me to put it down. And I think for white allies, it is, how do we help create the systems where backpack isn't required? So if we are creating a community like the beloved community that you all are trying to shape and live into in your church community, what are the dynamics that don't allow that to have to exist? And and it's not always just centering what is going on for the Black people. It's also, what does that mean for white people? How are we thinking about whiteness? How are we wrestling? How are we practicing our own discomfort so that we're actually more comfortable in discomfort, so that, we don't inadvertently, without even knowledge, create a dynamic where people of color have to cater to what is the dominant culture reality. So I know that wasn't probably super succinct, but hopefully that helps offer more commentary to a very—
It was great. Thank you so much. Thank you for your grace and mercy that you're exhibiting in this really difficult space. So thank you.
Yeah.
Susie, did you have a question?
Well, I wanted to reflect on an article written by a woman named Peggy McIntosh, and this idea of unpacking the white backpack, which is a backpack filled with privilege, unearned privilege. I have a link to the article. Is it okay if I link it in the chat for people to have access to? Because it's essentially—
right. Forgot about that, Susie. You are right. There is,
Yeah.
I remember this research from years ago.
Yeah.
I hadn't even thought about that. Yeah.
It's this idea that as a person who, and I am a woman who identifies as white, that I was given a white backpack as a child as well, that I've never had to, couldn't have never examined had I, not been awakened to that idea. So I'll put a link in the chat. to this, but thank you for your sharing and just the vulnerability that you've brought and the way that you've shared your life with ours. Thank you.
Thank you for receiving it. And yes, please do share about the white backpack, because I mean, I think what fascinates me often in this moment is there is so much burden for whiteness for white people. You know, I see it with my white friends, and there's more dialogue about it, but it's sexier. It's more interesting to talk about the burdens of people of color. But the reality is there actually is a heavy weight of privilege that is not serving white people very well, especially white Christians, right? Especially those of us who are wanting to not just decenter or, you know, recenter, but really are trying to blow up and live into all of these systems that diminish who we are and live into a more beloved community where notions of backpacks don't need to exist at all, right? So anyway, I did see there was a question in the chat too that I didn't want to miss, but go ahead.
I was just going to read the question in the chat. Myron Marston asks, are there particular forms of racial injustice that are more present, common in Seattle compared to what we hear happening nationally?
Mm-hmm. I like this question. Well, I mean, I think what's interesting in Seattle is because we're such a progressive city, I think it's a little bit, I mean, I think most people have heard this, but racism is it's not as blatant, it's not as forthcoming, but it is in every way built into our systems here that I think are different than like what you might see in the South or other places. You know, our education system for, you know, our Seattle Public Schools is actually one of the most, the academic performance and the disproportionality of, you know, Black and brown students is one of the worst school districts in our country. Most people don't know that. In wealthy Seattle, we have not figured out how to educate Black and brown kids, you know, and it nearly to, you know, in despicable amount rates compared to white students. So there's that. I mean, you think about how much wealth is in Seattle, and then you think about, you know, the disparities in our health system. You think about homelessness, right? So there is this sense of we're progressive, you know, we compost, you know, there's all these things that we do that are really important culturally to us. And we don't really talk or center race, but you look at, you know, the gentrification that's happened in the Central District, you look at the need for groups like Africatown, you look at the work of King County Equity Now, and these groups that are forming out of this sense of we're tired of being left in the shadows while development, wealth, resources are coming into Seattle. And it's been very much a kind of ground up grassroots movement of conversation. And so I think those are some groups that are talking uniquely about racial injustice in Seattle. King County Equity Now, I think there might be somebody else putting some, I don't know, so that's a little bit, I guess, of what comes to mind. There's a lot of respectability politics in Seattle that I think don't exist to that degree in other parts of the country, in my experience.
We're coming up towards the hour. Do we have any final questions for Leonetta?
Edna, I didn't know if you were just waving at me. I was waving.
Hi.
Hi, friend.
I have a question for you. Well, first of all, yeah, thank you. I think you are, you called me a light in the force, but you are an amazing shining light, and I'm grateful for you. Thank you.
Edna.
How do we begin conversations with people who might not even acknowledge that they have issues with that they don't even realize? Maybe because they might be the first people who say, "Oh, I'm not racist," but maybe just because of culture and because of generational, I don't know, what's the word? Norms that they think, no, that they think there's not, I don't have a problem.
Yeah.
But I mean, and you want to, I mean, of course, it's not the right thing to sort of say, yeah, you do. It's you just don't realize it. But how do you bring up that conversation with people?
Yeah. Well, two things. I would say if I can avoid the conversation at this point, I do, because I think there's enough people that want to be on the journey that need. So I think if you have a choice, I choose. Personally, I think, and as a woman of color, which I know the burden of this conversation is different for you, but it's certainly there, I would avoid it if you can. But my guess is you may be a family member, someone that you can't avoid, someone that you are inextricably connected to, or something that you want to lean in relationship with. And what I would say, I think what I find best is a little bit of what I did today. It's story, right? Like, people love you. They may not love the issues in a line, but usually cannot deny or decline what is your story and your truth, especially about your experience. And so I think I find if we start with politics, if we start with issues, if we start with, perspectives disconnected from our own story, then it's hard for people to lean in. But I found that helps a bit.
That's good. Thank you.
And I think we are at time. I know we have to wrap. I love you too, Erin. It's good to see you. I gave you a shout out in the intro. I don't know if you were here yet, but anyway, thank you guys so much.
Yeah, Leonetta, thank you. We just want to say thank you for your work in this time. Thanks for bringing us closer to beloved community and a space where racial justice can begin to look like shalom. We're grateful for how you bear hope and invite us to reconciling community. So thank you for your brave witness in this hour. It has been a gift and we're really grateful. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you guys. I look forward to visiting.
Leonetta, I just have one more 10-second question. How can we connect with you? I'm sure many of us would like to follow your work.
I have a website. It's beautifully.com. I'll put it in the chat. And you can get to my Instagram. It's just Leonetta E at Leonetta E. And I am working with a friend on a Black-centered Advent guide. So if you come back in a week, you'll be able to download that. Hopefully, if I can get it all done. So thank you.
I just want to also take a quick moment to thank you and echo Sarah's thanks, and thank you for your presence with us today and for bringing yourself. And I also want to take a moment just to say our next class will be December 13th. So there's nothing going on Thanksgiving weekend. There's Grace Kids on the 6th. And then our next Christian formation class will be on the 13th of December. We'll be talking about institutional racism and the concept of the powers and principalities. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.